change the shape of the model, we will issue commands from the Polygons menu set up here. With Polygons, the active menu set, you will see Mesh, Edit Mesh, and Mesh Tools. Mesh commands work primarily on entire objects. Edit Mesh commands generally work on components, and Mesh Tools can usually work on either. The Mesh Tools, by the way, are shared in common with the Modeling Toolkit. You will see here, Show Modeling Toolkit. We're not really going to cover the Modeling Toolkit in this lesson, but I can open it up just to show it to you. You'll see here that it's got some different tools and different modes available within this panel. I just want to point out that the Modeling Toolkit exists, and if you want to delve deeper into low polygon modeling, you might want to learn it. It's being integrated into the menus anyway, and so you're basically using all the same tools. I do cover the Modeling Toolkit in depth in a lynda.com video, which is Maya 2014 New Features. Okay, let's close that back up again. Select the object, and so we can see it in wireframe even if it's shaded. We can enable that option from the panel toolbar here. Wireframe on shaded. And if it's deselected, we can still see its wires. That's really helpful when modeling, especially when you have low polygons. We want to extrude out all four sides here to make a frame. Select the object and right-click and go into Face Component mode. And you can start selecting faces. To add to your selection, hold down Control and Shift and click on something. And you'll see it's being added. Control Shift, left click. It's helpful sometimes to turn on X-ray mode. That's also on the panel toolbar here. X-ray mode lets you see through things, and that can sometimes give you a better picture of what's selected and what's not. Hold down Control and select that bottom polygon as well. And with all four of those selected, I can issue the command. Be aware that almost anything you do in this Edit Mesh or Mesh menu is going to add history nodes. That means that it's going to start cluttering your object up with a lot of instructions. You don't want to keep repeatedly going into this menu and issuing the same command over and over again. That's going to cause a lot of problems with your model because you're basically adding garbage data. I'll show you how to edit existing nodes. But for now, just be aware that when you do an extrude, if you have any problems, don't go back into the menu and do the same thing again because you're actually going to make the problem worse. I'm going to issue Edit Mesh Extrude. And now I don't see anything. I see this manipulator. That is waiting for me to do something. I can select and move this blue arrow up, and that's going to extrude outward by a certain distance. And as I move that, if my channel box is open, you will see values change here, especially in local translate Z. That's the number of inches that I'm extruding. I can set that to a value of 3 inches if I want. Press Enter. You'll see some other controls here. I would steer clear of these. There's thickness and offset. We'll look at offset a little bit later, but the controls in the viewport here are kind of problematic. Also be aware that these are going to be in centimeters no matter what. It's just hardwired that way. Whereas these values will be in whatever your current working units are. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We've got that extruded out. We can also extrude the face inward here. But before we do, we need to learn a little bit about how the construction history works. If you deselect, let's say you grab the select tool, or if you just click off the object, you'll lose that manipulator. But you can always go back and move it around later or adjust the attributes in the channel box or attribute editor. As long as you haven't deleted history, you still have the instructions on how that extrude was performed. And if we select the object, we can see we have inputs over here. And even though I'm in component mode, I can still see them. To get a better picture of what's really going on, you probably want to be in object mode. So you can right-click and go back to object mode and select the object. And what we're seeing here is the structure of the object. At the bottom here are input nodes. And there could be lots of them. We could have hundreds of them that determine all the operations that we want to perform on the object. Let's say we want to extrude a bit here, or we want to taper a bit there. Most of the things that we do, especially from the menus, are going to add history nodes. We'll see Polycube 1 is there, and Polyextrude Face 1 as well. Above that, we will see the shapes, and there's just one. The shape is the output of all of the history nodes. So you can imagine that these are the instructions to build the object, and this is the actual sort of printed object. And then above that is the transform node that determines where the object is, how it's oriented and scaled, and so on. As long as we haven't deleted history, we can go back into these input nodes and play around with things. I could go into Polycube 1 and say change the width. Maybe set it to 40 inches instead of 36.6. And everything kind of works okay. I'll put it back. I'll just undo that. But there will be problems if, for example, you change the number of divisions, because that will then have an undesired result on subsequent nodes in the history. Let's say I set subdivision's width to 2, for example. I get a completely different end result. We can't really do this. We have to understand the limitations of the construction history. If we change topology, or the number of points on the object and how they're connected, then that's going to have a very odd result downstream when we have a lot of history nodes following it. Set that back to 1. So just be aware, once again, you have limited ability to go back down into the history and make changes. And I'm ready now to work with the front of the model. I've turned myself around here, got my z-axis pointing to the back. So I want to make sure that it's pointing towards me. And work with the front face here. Right-click and choose Face Component Mode and select that center face. And we want to extrude inward. Go to Edit Mesh, Face Extrude. Push that in a little bit. And in Local Translate Z, maybe set that to -0.5, half an inch inward. I can turn off the X-ray mode now. Take a look at this. I've got a little bit of a recess in there. Let's make some speakers on the sides as well. I want to select these side faces. Click on that and then tumble around, hold down Control-Shift and click on the other. With those two polygons selected, once again I can do Edit Mesh Extrude or just press the G key on the keyboard. And that will repeat the most recent command. And there's a subtle distinction in Maya between commands and tools. A tool is anything that's labeled as a tool, and a command is anything else. The most recent tool hotkey is Y, but the most recent command hotkey is G. So when you press G, that means do the most recent command. And I've got another extrude here. I'm going to set its local translate Z to, let's say, 3 inches. And now I've got a little platform for that speaker to extrude outward from. I'll select the front faces now with Control-Shift-Click. And then Edit Mesh Extrude. Or once again, just press the G key on the keyboard. And I can extrude those forward. And once again, maybe I'll just set the local translate Z to 0.25 inches. Very cool. I've got the front of my TV made pretty well. We can do the back, but what we want to do in the back here is actually clean it up because, in fact, it's really kind of disorganized. In order to prepare this, I want to kind of clear this out and make it one big polygon back there. I can select that center face, and I can easily grow the selection, and that's with the Shift period hotkey. So Shift period will grow the selection, and that's also the greater than symbol on your keyboard. And we can do Shift comma or less than symbol to shrink the selection. And I want to select these on the sides too. Control Shift select, and now I've got all those back polygons selected. And in fact, I just want to delete them. Press delete on the keyboard. Now I've punched a big hole in the model. The front is all pristine. The back has got this gaping hole. I want to make just a big giant polygon here, and I can do that with the fill hole tool. But before I do, I want to clean up this little issue here. Basically, I want to get rid of this edge. It's going to make my subsequent extrusions back here look better. So I'll get rid of that edge there. Right click and go into Edge Component and click on it, and it's selected. And if you press delete on the keyboard, it goes away, but it leaves a vertex behind over here. And we can see that if we right click and go into Vertex Component mode. And there's a single vertex left over. If I go into wireframe with the 4 key, it may be easier to see it. There it is. Go back to shaded with 5. We can select that vertex and delete it manually, but it's much easier to delete it along with its associated edge. And there's a command for that. Go over to the other one here. Go into Edge Component mode. Right click and choose Edge. select it, and the command is found under Edit Mesh, Edge, Delete Edge / Vertex. And that'll delete the selected edge as well as any associated vertices. Or just use the keyboard shortcut, which is Control Delete. So with it selected, I can hit Control Delete, and the edge is removed and the vertex. And I can double check that. Right click and go to Vertex, and there's no vertex there any longer. Cool. Go back into Edge component mode and get the last two. These guys here. There's one, and then hold down Control Shift, select the other one, and choose Control Delete. And now I've deleted all of that stuff, and I can fill the hole back here. Need to go into object mode. Right click and choose object and select, and go to Mesh, Fill Hole. Boom. Now that's one giant polygon back there, and it's going to be a great candidate for extrusions. I'll get some really nice clean edges over here because I've set it up properly. I don't have a bunch of garbage around the perimeter of that quadrilateral polygon. You'll see I got some history nodes here. If I start mucking around too much with this stuff, then I might have some issues. I would recommend this is a good point to delete the construction history. With the object selected, go to Edit, Delete by Type, History, and Increment and Save. And now that's saved out version 2, as we can see down here. Version 2.